So, hello everyone. It's nice to see you all today. The three of us are going to spend the next 20 minutes, we're going to devote ourselves to trying to make you, as individuals or an organisation, that little bit more effective. So, I'm Juliet, I'm MD of Effie UK. For those of you who haven't heard of us, we are the world's leading effectiveness organisation, and we cover about 125 markets, and for the last 3 months we've been doing a massive study into what makes organisations effective, and we are going to give you a sneak preview of that today, and then I'm going to have a really inspirational discussion with these two, Neasa, who's Head of Strategy for Mother London, and Rich, who is the Marketing Director of KFC. And the reason why these guys have been invited to share the stage is because they consistently knock it out the park. So if you look at our Effie Global Effectiveness Index, KFC nearly always in the top 3. And if you look at the UK, where Mother and KFC, you've worked together for what, 6 years now? They're 6 years into a really successful partnership. And last year they won a gold in our Sustained Success category, which, let me tell you, is no easy feat. So, riders of the storm, what does that mean? Kind of means that effectiveness has never mattered more. And the reason for that is, when we talk to boardrooms across the land, what we're hearing is they're no longer content with the promise of jam tomorrow. That's not going to kind of fob them off. What they're looking for are results today and profit today. And that in turn puts massive pressure on marketing budgets, which puts pressure in turn on us marketeers to really drive results. So let's dive into the findings. It's probably important for you to understand who we did our research against. So they were our top performers in the Effie Index, people who'd won golds and grands, our most experienced judges, and people who sit on our boards and councils and committees. So by and large, really successful leaders who know a thing or two about establishing effectiveness. And yeah, when we asked them whether they were happy with their effectiveness culture in their organisation, only 1/3 of them felt that it was really mature and sorted. I don't know whether that's scary or cheering for the rest of us, but what is definitely cheering is that the lessons coming out of our research are really consistent and really clear. So, there we go. Let's start with learning number 1. And learning number 1 is there are 3 key building blocks to effectiveness, and you kind of need all 3 of them if you're really going to go off to the races. So we're going to unpack each one really briefly. So, 70% of people say that effectiveness culture starts at the top. And by that we mean there's a real clarity of vision that's required. Because let's face it, it's really hard to be successful if you can't define what success looks like. So once you set the vision, then what you need to do is put some of the behaviours and cultural values in place so you can really make it easy for your teams to play their part. And then here's a super practical one for you. And this works whether you're trying to figure out objectives for a marketing project or big company-wide objectives. Any more than 2 or 3, and it starts unraveling and gets really, really confusing. So being really laser-like. And then trying to put some fuel in the engine. 3/4 of our respondents absolutely invested in training that really focused on developing marketing effectiveness skills. And the other thing that was really interesting is over half of them made sure that effectiveness KPIs were built in right through marketing teams, from the most junior levels to the most senior levels. And the reason why that's important is everyone should share in the success, because effectiveness really is a team game. It's not down to one person, it's about lifting people up and helping them to excel. You really can't micromanage individuals if you really want them to perform. So, when we asked people what they look for when they were hiring people or promoting people, or when they were thinking about developing really effective cultures, these 4 words are the words to hold in your heads, because they came up time and time again. So, first off, empowerment. You need people to feel a sense of accountability and a sense of ownership over what they're doing. A real practical reason for that is sometimes, and I think we're going to talk about this in a minute, people need to have the bravery and the courage to have the hard conversations early doors. People only do that if they feel a sense of strength in their position. And then collaboration, barriers, silos, separating data from creativity, that's no friend to effectiveness either. And then underpinning everything with a day-to-day rigor. And then last but absolutely definitely not least, because we see time and time again from the research we do, creativity exponentially drives effectiveness. And I don't just mean creativity in terms of creative ideas that power marketing, I mean creativity and problem solving on a day-to-day basis. So, processes, can't give you a blueprint for that, I'm afraid. What I can do is give you some principles. So the first one is how you start off is key. I'm going to touch on that in a second. The second one is all about making some space for some iteration and for some learning. And the third is making sure everyone understands what role they're playing. You don't want everyone running around after the ball all at once. So if you sign up, I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to stick to the end. One thing to take away with you, effectiveness is not the thing that happens at the end. Quite often it's the thing that happens at the beginning. If you download a copy of our report, you will get access to loads of tools and thinking that are going to help you. But for now, let's go and have a chat with these two. So after all of that theory, I wanted to start in a really practical place. So if I was going to force you to give one tip for managing your way to effectiveness, what would it be?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that you mentioned it at the start, and it's about building a really credible and genuine partnership. And one of the things that I think is quite special about the relationship that our brand and Mother have is over the 6-7 years that we've worked together is that we both invested in that partnership. And from a very practical sense, that's about putting time, effort and love into the partnership. So simple things like spending time together on a regular basis, having like weekly and monthly one-to-ones, whether it's on the work or off the work, is incredibly important. As well as some of the more agile stuff. So the chats that we have over WhatsApp when things are in the moment or something's particularly interesting actually makes a significant difference.
Yeah, I think one of the things KFC do really well is they're quite open about inviting us into the business. So for instance, they have a monthly meeting with all their franchisees where they present our work to the business owners, and they also present their own marketing plans. And there's nothing that gives you a better insight into how naive you are about the practicalities of how something is going to work in a restaurant, or how your really clever packaging idea is completely unworkable in practice, than hearing franchisees whose livelihood depends on it saying, that's a really stupid idea, you need to try harder, mother. And I think you start developing an instinct for what's really going to work in practice, and then it allows you to have much more creative ideas that actually work and that the business can actually buy, rather than things that you develop in a vacuum that sound really good in the agency and that are never going to get bought.
Yeah.
And even things like you guys have a global conference in Dallas every year where every single KFC market from around the world shares their best practice. And we've been really privileged to send someone to that every year. And again, in terms of creative intuition, our ECD Felix went this year and he just came back and he was literally buzzing about the amount of different ways you can photograph chicken, which before he went was not his area of interest. And now he's really excited about like crispiness as a texture, and that kind of thing. You know, it takes time and money on behalf of both KFC and us, but it's well worth it for what you can do with the work afterwards.
So thinking about the fact that actually therefore like effectiveness is quite a human thing, right? So going back to those cultural values and the characteristics in their people, what would you say are the most important kind of characteristics from your culture of working together?
I think the first thing to say is enthusiasm. So having a genuine excitement for the work and the project that we have together is just so infectious, both for our teams at KFC but also at Mother. And it comes back to my earlier point about partnership. When you have that centre of gravity around the ideas and what they can become, is incredibly powerful. So I think enthusiasm for the work is incredibly important. I suppose the other thing that we'll probably touch on is a little bit of honesty. And honesty to have not just the conversations when the work is exciting and great and on strategy, but sometimes if it's veering off in any way, shape or form, that's where actually having honest conversations where you might have a different point of view is just incredibly important, and you can't have those unless you have a credible depth of relationship to begin with.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I would go one further and say you need to be able to argue well, which is quite a difficult thing to do, that idea of kind of positive conflict. There's this saying that if there's two people in a business and they always agree, you've got one person too many.
Yeah.
And I think the reason you hire an agency is to have a different perspective, but it also means there is going to be conflict, and you're going to have, come from different places, and you have to get to a point where you can not just smile and nod in the room and then go back to your relative places and send an email where you totally disagree with what you've just said to their face, but be brave enough to say it in the room, and also to know that your relationship is strong enough that no one's going to be hurt or take it personally, that they're going to know it's about the work, because it's a good argument with respect.
It also just builds on the fact that you can have a point of view or reaction in the moment, but also you need time to reflect and come back together and discuss it.
Yeah. And then what about process? So we saw from our research coming up that actually almost in a way the beginning is the most important bit, and how you kick off projects. So can you talk to us a little bit about how you kick off the big things between you both?
Well, one thing we've developed over the last few years as part of brand planning is having what we call pre-brief sessions. Which sounds really obvious, but actually most of the time it doesn't happen with most brands and clients. So by the time you get a brief, the marketing team has put a lot of effort into it. It's been signed off by everyone in their business. They're really invested in it. And it's a bit like if someone asks you when you're about to go out what you think of their outfit. Like, you can say nothing then, other than it's great, you look great, Whereas if you have the conversation early on, like when they're in the shop buying it, you can say that looks awful, terrible for you. How about this instead? And I think the pre-brief sessions we have, and it's hard for those guys as well, because they're quite vulnerable. They're bringing something very first drafty, it's not finished, it's not signed off, and then they have to have a session with us where we unpick everything, and we have the debates and we have the hard conversations earlier. But it means by the time you actually get a proper brief that's ready to be briefed in, we've got a really solid foundation.
That makes total sense. And then I think one of the things we notice at Effie when we're sneakily stalking your work around the world is you manage to localize it so beautifully, and yet there is a kind of top flight creative consistency by and large around the world. So how does that, practically, how do you make that happen? How does that even work?
I think the first thing to say is you've got to have really strong brand foundations. So get really, really clear about what your brand stands for, your creative vision, whether it's having a brand world, your brand personality. You need to codify the brand so everybody can understand it and then deploy it in a local fashion. And you're right to say that we have a consistency across the world, and it comes from that brand framework to begin with. But equally, each of our local markets have the ability and autonomy to express the brand as relevant to the consumer base in that particular market. So I think you need strong foundations before you do anything else.
So there are some guardrails, and then people are free to experiment within those guardrails.
Yeah, and I think the team is a really important thing as well. So we've been working with KFC for about 5 or 6 years, and we think quite hard about the casting on the account. So we always have a mix of people that have worked on it for ages, like me, who's been there since the start, but also bringing in fresh talent. And if you get it ever so slightly wrong at any point, you either have work coming back that's, by people that are too new to the brand and they've misread the tone of voice and the ideas don't feel right and it takes too long, or it gets stale if you have, too many people that are overly familiar and they've done everything before and they've had the same conversations about what doesn't work. So getting the exact right alchemy of old and new people on both sides, totally. I think, gives you kind of a perfect mix of consistency, but also making sure that you're creative and you are pushing boundaries and not just doing pretty much the same as what you did last year.
That makes sense. Okay, thanks. Should we be brave and take a question from the floor?
Sure.
I think we've got a few minutes left.
Okay.
So,
being brave.
we're being brave. Why
I
not?
don't know if I'm on
We
the
have
right
to put the
level
earphones
thing.
on.
Put the earphones on.
Right.
We're having some problems with the app, so if you jump into the app, click Q&A and then polls, click the brand innovation stage, and you can ask a question via there. We do have one to kick us off. I think it's from Steve, who's in the audience. He said, everyday effectiveness. What are some of the tips and tricks for doing that every day? How do you bring that home for being effective every day?
I think it's that combination of getting your culture right and your behaviours right. So the energy around creativity, but also the rigour. It's like the resilience and the discipline of day-to-day life. But that's what we see from really effective teams, is they're collaborative, they all know what part that they're playing, and they really own that particular part. I don't know whether you've got thoughts to add?
Yeah, I think the other thing is just thinking about the end audience or the end consumer, because you can get really caught up in marketing theory and in what, someone's boss is going to like or what you can sell through. And if you kind of clear all that away and you go, what's going to work in the real world? What would make my friends take notice of something?
Yeah.
What would work with people I know? Then you often can't go too far wrong as long as you have that kind of filter.
Yeah, I agree. It's doing things in the right order.
I'd say definitely structure and setup are incredibly important, but also remind yourself where you started. What are the objectives of the beast? What are you going to measure yourself by? And making sure the team are carrying those through all the way to the end, because as Neasa says, it's quite easy along the way to get lost from that.
It is.
And so I think that's incredibly important.
Yeah, I think clarity around the problem, then you set your objectives, then you figure out how you're going to measure them. If you do that, you're going to set yourself up.
Excellent. Hope that answers your question. Steve, I'm going to be brave and run with the mic, but any questions from the floor, if you want to raise your hand, I'll come over to you. Any questions from the floor? Okay. Oh, yes.
Yes,
perfect.
well done.
So one of you guys mentioned about like setting up a brand personality. Kind of, how did you go about doing that? Because obviously we hear about like customer personas a lot, but not so much the brand personality side of things.
Yeah, I mean, the brand persona that we set up, we did through a series of workshops, but it's not invented out of nowhere. So it comes from the spirit of the brand, and ultimately, because it's KFC, it kind of is inspired by the spirit of the Colonel, who was a real person and was actually quite a maverick. And I won't go too much into some of his life choices, but I think when you have something like that and you've developed work and you've gotten a sense of when the tone was right, when it was wrong, you start to kind of collect all the things that you know are true of the brand, and then you can have a session where you try and create something that captures it in some way. So for us, it's the lovable rogue, which felt like a really nice encapsulation of the kind of mischievous cheekiness of the brand, but also the warmth and the kind of, heart of gold in the center of it that KFC have as an organization.
The only thing I would add is that not every brand has a founder. Some do, some younger brands do, some older brands do. It doesn't matter whether you do or not. The people of the company make up the brand. So as they go to the people, if you have team members working in store, go and speak to them. Understand the culture of your business and how it infuses your brand. And that sets you up for success.
Yeah, totally.
Brilliant. Well, that brings us home into land. Let's give our panelists a round of applause. Some fantastic insights.